Hello there, and you're very welcome to this discussion of the play Blackbird, which is currently on national tour of Ireland with Decadent Theatre Company. Our discussion today is part of the outreach programme that Decadent has commissioned to try and offer some context for this complex and challenging play. And we should mention now that sexual abuse of a minor is part of the subject matter of this play, and therefore will also be part of our conversation today. The play is deemed suitable for viewers of 16 years and over. Blackbird won an Olivier Award as Best Newcomer in 2007, and it's appeared all over the world and in many languages since it first debuted in the Edinburgh Festival in 2005 and took viewers and critics by storm there. I'm joined for this discussion by two brilliant writers and academics, Donal Ryan and Sarah Moore Fitzgerald, who are both teachers on the creative writing programme in the University of Limerick. And they've been to see the play at the Bell Table. Thank you both for joining me. So let's talk a little bit about the play. Blackbird is a heart-stopping confrontation between two people who are bound by a shared experience that really haunts them. And after years in prison, the male character, Ray, has built a new identity and a new life for himself. But the female character, Una, has found him, and she arrives unannounced at his workplace to challenge him about this relationship that they had 15 years ago when he was 40 and she was just 12. Sarah, were you familiar with this play beforehand, and were you familiar with the work of David Harrower?
I'd heard about the play, but I can't, hadn't seen it. I had only heard a discussion about it, I think, in the midst of time. So I did come very sort of fresh and without much context to the play, which is probably quite a good way to come to a play like this. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I wasn't even sure when we walked in on Friday exactly what we were going to see. And I don't think anybody can be really prepared for it. I mean, Donal and I were there on the same night, and just the kind of, there's silences in the audience that you don't usually hear. There was a kind of a real, it's just so unsettling and so riveting at the same time. I mean, it was brilliantly done and just superbly acted. And I think the whole sense of claustrophobia and tension was just palpable. But in response to your question, I didn't know much about it except for the basic theme. So yeah. It was a lot to take in.
And Donal, what about you? Were you aware of, the kind of the controversial nature of the play before you went to see it?
No, only because actually when Danny invited me to have this discussion, she mentioned in her email that it was a controversial play. And I was about to Google it and I stopped. And I had a vague memory of hearing about the controversy at the time, but it was a time when I wasn't as plugged into these things. So I kind of had just a very, very distant idea of what it was about. But I thought, the best thing here is to go in completely raw into it, just to have the maximum impact, like Sarah. And so I didn't. I mean, as Sarah said, it's so unsettling. I mean, it's the least entertaining piece of theatre I've ever seen, and of course it's designed that way. That's the way it has to be.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just the idea of a play about what is a paedophilic relationship, I suppose, that happened in the past. I mean, that in itself, the subject matter, it's so unsettling for us. But the play at the time was accused of condoning paedophilia, but that's like, let's just dispense with that elephant in the room at the start of the conversation. It doesn't do that. What it does is it kind of withholds moral judgment until the very end, I think. But how does it feel to watch something like that where, we're used to seeing the black and white in a piece of work like this? Maybe we're used to knowing, okay, well, there's the baddie and there's the goodie, or there's the victim and there's the villain, and it doesn't sort of present the characters in that way. Is that part of the unsettling nature of seeing this play?
Yeah, I mean, do you want me to go first, Edel?
Oh yeah, sorry, I for the Zoom, we should always name people. I'm so sorry, Sarah. Yes, you go ahead, and then Donal, maybe you'll give me your answer to that.
In a way, I think this is the genius of the play. That I think, Ray comes over as quite very self-pitying, very self-protecting. I think, you know, there's no question that from the, I mean, I think there's a question in his mind, but I don't think there would be a question in the audience's mind about the depth of the wrongness and the kind of gratuitous crime that he has committed. I think he's still trying to contextualize and justify this. And that is very interesting to look at, because I think that's, you know, a huge issue in terms of child abuse, that the abusers will use all kinds of justifications. I mean, a couple of times it was really chilling. He sort of used what I think they call, since Lolita, the defense or the nymphette defense, which was just so chilling. I think maybe now, because we know so much about how toxic that sort of rationalization is, just it really came across as shocking. So at one point he says in the play, you know, you knew more about love than I knew. And there's a reference as well to in the court, the judge had said that Una had you know, disturbingly adult leanings or something like that. And it just is viscerally shocking, because we see played out on the stage these defenses that are used to justify or contextualize the unjustifiable and the uncontextualizable, you know. And so I found it enormous. I think you're I don't think at all it romanticizes or glamorizes this crime. What I think it does do, which is incredibly clever, is it shows how that can be romanticized in the eyes of the perpetrator.
Yeah.
And
that's so true. Yeah. It's so true. I mean, and the romantic terms in which Peter speaks about the relationship, and actually, because he describes his own grooming process, and he recasts it as himself being he casts himself almost as an adolescent kind of boy with yearning, you know, for company and for love. And
he's almost a victim as well in his own eyes.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, you know, the term gaslighting is overused and it's losing its power because of that. But I mean, he does it all through the play. He keeps saying, no, I was outside the front and I was fixing my car, even though it was totally perfect, because I just wanted to see you and be near you. You know, it was you. It wasn't the fact that you were a young girl. And I mean, it just amplifies, the horror is amplified by that. You know, the fact that we know this. And I mean, even when there are, you know, I think there are 2 points in the play where you almost can move towards sympathy, because the character was acted so well as well. And again, that amplifies the horror. You know, it's actually, it's increased exponentially at the end. And
I think that's something, Donal, you're right. Like you do, and you're horrified at yourself because of it, but you do, the way it's written, the words used, the acting, there's a sense of sympathy evoked for both characters.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's horrifying. And Harrow obviously was deliberately trying to do that, to sort of have the impact that he has then later in the play when another character is introduced. But I wanted to ask you, Sarah, you mentioned something there where you said that, you know, now we know so much about, you know, consent, the grooming process, pedophilia, that maybe we didn't know when this play was first put on in 2005. And I was thinking about that, and also the fact that would this play be commissioned today? Because we're now very sensitive about what stories writers choose and what they write about. And I was thinking, I wonder, would this get commissioned today? Would it just be deemed too sensitive? And is there a difference in the time it was written and, you know, the time we're viewing it now as viewers? What do you both think about that? I
mean, I think it would, if that's true, it would be a terrible pity, you know, if plays like this were being kind of cancelled or not, or new material dealing with these topics were not being commissioned, because I think that you know, if we're ever going to come to terms with dreadful wrongs that human beings do to each other, we have to see fictionalized versions of those wrongs as a way into the conversation. Otherwise, it just reinforces the taboo and allows ignorance to prevail and allows people to stay outside the conversation if they find it distasteful or upsetting or triggering. And of course, I think there's, you know, we need to be, the one thing I kept on thinking about again and again is somebody who has suffered from child abuse watching a play like this, and their sense of feeling that assumptions have been made about them. I mean, the one concern I had, not really about the story, because a story can only ever be an approximation of specific lives and specific experiences, and so can't generalize and can't come to any conclusions and shouldn't. But the one concern I did have, Edel, was the fact that Una is still very damaged and she hasn't recovered. And while on one hand, I completely understand narratively why that would be, that's important in the context of this story, so that everyone sees, we hear from her voice, from her adult voice, the damage that's been done and the way her life is and how she hasn't been able to move on from this, and her, you know, distorted sense of attachment as well, which I think is quite a common thing in child abuse, in people who have experienced child abuse. But, you know, there's very few stories about, you know, active recovery of people prevailing over their damage, you know. And I think if we're in this new wave of awareness, I think it would be really good to have more stories about that. But getting back to your original question, I think, you know, it's very hard, I don't know quite how to put this. I think there's been an over, you know, I think the concern about stories relating to difficult topics like this can turn into a kind of an excessive taboo that would impoverish us all and not allow ways into conversations about difficult topics.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Donal? I mean, you're both writers. Do you ever have difficulty yourself approaching topics, or do you ever feel not a self-censorship, but a concern that, oh, maybe I'm doing this story an injustice, or do I need to be extra careful around this subject matter?
Oh, for sure, Edel. I mean, you know, there are certain places that I know I'm not prepared to go yet. And, you know, I've said before that my life sometimes feels like a series of revelations, and I discover things that most people knew years ago on a constant basis. And I've always said it's kind of a good place for a writer to be. But, you know, it can be very profound and stark at times, and it can be life-altering on a daily basis. And there are certain things that I, you know, struggle to get my head around, and therefore struggle to find any way in for empathy. So because you have to be able to try to imagine what it's like to be all sorts of people in all sorts of situations. You know yourselves when you write fiction. And so it can be very difficult. I really do think it's an incredibly brave play. I think that if Peter was, or Ray was on stage, you know, and he was lurking about in a malign way, and it was very binary, good versus evil, set up on the stage, it wouldn't have the same impact. I mean, the fact that he is just this, he seems to be this ordinary, banal guy. It's like Hannah Arendt's The Banality of Evil, when she discussed Trial of Eichmann. Eichmann, you know, was the architect of the Holocaust, but before that, he was a vacuum cleaner salesman. And in court, that's how he presented himself. I'm an ordinary guy. I was told to do it. You know, I mean, I had no choice. Just as Ray does in the play, you know, he has a defense for every single thing that Una says.
Yeah, God, so true.
Yeah, it's incredibly chilling, actually. And yeah, the more I think about it, the more I feel how clever David Harrower was, and how he unfolded this story and sort of brought us into this place where, as I said, we might have some sort of sympathy for both characters, but then really he just reminds us
exactly
that it's almost like the audience in a way are being groomed to have sympathy with him, convinced by all those arguments, you know.
That's exactly it. He actually shows us how that process works, and it happens to us as we watch the play. That's exactly it.
Exactly. It's so true. And the other thing that really struck me as you're watching that get played out is how every single person in Una's life has let her down. You know, obviously it's not Ray's abuse is at the center of it, but they're the adults that ignored her and laughed at her when she's looking for help. You know, at her moment, at the time of greatest distress, she tells that story you know, the police, her re-traumatizing examination afterwards, her parents, nobody ever giving her voice or control or agency over any aspect of her recovery, as well as the crime itself. And for me, even though this is not a didactic play, just as Donal has said, there's a real there's so many lessons here, I think, about a collective responsibility to be vigilant, to look through these banal kind of exteriors and to see what's happening and to respond appropriately. So there's a huge amount of that whole, you know, the whole of society's response. Una has been betrayed and let down again and again, and she knows it as well. And at least her voice is able to tell us that.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you both about the fact that the play is set in the time that it's set. So she's now 27 and he's now 55. So they're both adults. There's still a big age gap, but they're both adults, and the crime is in the past. And I wondered, again, it's all part of David Harrower's very clever approach to writing this, but how did that impact how you viewed the play, their age now, and the fact that they were both adults? You know, did it play with how we were approaching the characters, I suppose? How did it affect your viewing of the play, the fact that they were now both adults and, you know, what had happened was in the past?
Well, I think what was really important about that is that we got to hear Una's grown-up voice. And I think her experience of the trauma and how she articulates that is a real retort to deluded fantasies about what might have been going on. So I suppose coming back to that theme as well. You know, the fact that there will always be, you know, in all of us, we carry our child, you know, all of us have the younger person that we were inside of us. And all the good things that were done and all the nurturing that's happened plays itself out every day, just as all the damage does. So I think it was a really important, you know, kind of depiction of context, that she has had time to recognize what was going on, that, you know, at no point can it ever be said that, you know, her emerging sexuality as a 12-year-old girl could in any way have been justification for his behavior. So, and I think she sees that very clearly, even though her boundaries are all over the place, and she's still in the process of recovering and coming to terms with the damage that's been done to her.
Yeah. That's it. I mean, there's a point where she says she's appealing to Ray, and she says, "I have a job, you know," and she is again the 12-year-old girl who was trying to impress him. I mean, and you can see the horror of that. This damage is so profound, you know. He's destroyed her basically, and it just, you know, and the way she's portrayed on stage. I mean, it switches moment by moment, but you know all through it, and absolutely starkly at the end, you know exactly what has happened, exactly the nature of it. And I mean, even those, I think there are two moments where there's almost levity on stage, and the chuckles from the audience have a guilty tinge, because we know we shouldn't be laughing, you know. But there's a moment of slowdown and almost tenderness, and a conversation where they laugh.
What were those moments, Donal?
Those moments, I mean, those moments just amplify the horror so completely.
Yeah.
You know, that, you know, he could actually do it again. He could victimize her again. And also you see in those moments that he almost has her convinced again, you know, that the construction that he's putting out there in front of him is actually still working. That's how powerful it is, how well planned, how insidious, you know. And I mean, you know, because it's very much a play about evil and how evil works and how it acts. And, you know, I think the final scenes actually are just, I think it's perfect. You know, I think it couldn't be better. I mean, it's absolutely, I couldn't sleep that night. You know, you just can't shut off from the fact that this third character turns up, and all of a sudden the absolute truth, you know, the things that have been deliberately muddied throughout the play and deliberately obfuscated now are completely stark. And now at last it's completely binary. It really is, you know, a situation where we've been shown true evil. And I think the squalor and the squalid nature of the set, you know, and the fact it's a two-hander.
I wanted to talk about that actually. So the set is littered with just food and rubbish and just general litter, and it's filthy. And I wanted to talk to you about what you felt that represented and why that was the set.
Oh goodness, I mean, this is the thing that kept coming back to me. This is the power of plays, because it's the image and it's the space that's created and what that actually means, and the backdrop on which the story is played out is just absolutely, like, that's part of its genius, And I was telling Donal, I went back to reading Lolita again, because of a similar theme, but completely different kind of, because Lolita never gets to tell her side of the story, and it's all written in written in the language of romance and the rhetoric of romance, and everything has a golden glow about it, and it's all depicted as kind of beautiful and soft focus. And this is this play is the retort, Like in Blackbird, there is no gold, there is no soft focus, nothing is blunting or softening the sense of just all the wrongness and damage and crime and trauma. And, this is not a love story. It's a story of delusion and damage and negligence and abrogation of responsibility and fear and grimness. And all of that comes out on the stage, because it's just so awful. It's like the worst kind of break room environment of a kind of, a company that you could ever imagine, with these sort of dented lockers and these awful chairs and rubbish everywhere. It's so claustrophobic, but it's, I think, really purposeful in terms of the narrative too.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the understandable criticisms of Lolita, that these things happen in such a context of linguistic beauty. Nabokov, the language is too beautiful for that book, for the ugly things that happen. And I think the set, I've never seen a more effective set, a more effective context for something like this. It's just perfect. The squalid nature of it, the squalor of it, and I mean, the desperation is just there on the stage. It's in the bins on both sides. It's on the floor, in the lockers. It was a really, really well done and well directed. And that's, I think, it's the most apposite of sets, because, what we're looking at is two human beings who are in a situation where all of the contingencies possible really have been brought to bear in this one moment. I mean, and you can feel the intensity of the pressure that's bearing down in them. And that's another thing that feeds into our almost sympathy at times for the character of Ray. I think it's so skillful how Harrower did that. And it's everything that's present on the stage feeds into us feeling that way. And because we have to do it, because that's how we absolutely can understand the depths of it then, and understand the danger. And I think the message that he's getting across, he does it so brilliantly. And I wouldn't say subtly, but these things, it's not on the nose. It's just he's saying this is actually how it happens. It's in that way. It's I think art being used for its most noble purpose.
And it's a mess that just never gets cleaned up, and he's stepping in it, and there's attempts to clean up, but it just it feels so futile, or it feels sort of almost tokenistic, the efforts to clean up.
Edel, exactly. I mean, and that kid, the kind of sign of a really, brilliant and complex play is that things keep echoing back to you afterwards. I mean, Donal was saying he didn't sleep that night, and Ger and I were talking about it the next morning, and my daughter asked me about it, and I was like, at first I was kind of like, do I really want to talk to her about this? And, so it was really, really kind of upset. But that was the image that came back to me, was Ray kind of futilely picking up bits of the rubbish and trying to kind of, stuff it into the bin, as if, and it was like such a reflection of his tiny, flimsy efforts to try to resolve this unresolvable thing he's done. So it was just so clever. And it was almost, we tell our students, everything must be in service of the story when you're writing. Like, you can't, even the little details, there's got to be some sort of echo that glances off the story. And in a way, this is a masterclass in storytelling, because just even technically and narratively, It's like there isn't a single moment or word or image or object that doesn't serve the story.
Yeah. And the language is very sparse as well. Like I read it as, and it's almost like two monologues that are sort of intersecting or interrupting each other. What did you think of the language and how Harrow wrote those two characters and what they were saying? Donal, what did you think?
Well, again, just to go back to Lolita again, because it comes up, it comes to mind all the time in relation to this play. Since I watched the play, and I think that sparseness is necessary. I think it's and I think he had to be hyper real about it. I mean, they both speak they have very believable, relatable locutions. All of their speech patterns are the speech patterns you would expect of people in the situation they're in. But and it kind of aggregates the truth aggregates itself through Ray's speech. I think his monologues are just so powerfully done because it's a display. I think just doing a quick Google afterwards. I think David Harrow based him on a real case in Scotland.
Yes.
And I think and that line that Sarah referred to, where the judge said about the victim that you have suspiciously adult desires. That line being put in there of terrible legalese, of the worst kind of legalese being put in there among this kind of ordinary conversation that two people are having, makes it so profound. And that's it. And the ordinariness, the banality of their words and expressions, and the things they're expressing, or the way they're expressing the things they say, really feeds into the horror again. And the idea that this exists among us all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So well done.
What did you think of the language used, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say it better than that. I think there was one moment when Ray says, "I made the stupidest mistake I've ever made in my life."
Yeah.
And I just, like, that for me, it was so chilling because it echoed so many defenses put forward by abusive people who are, it's self-pitying. It completely dismisses and diminishes the extent of the damage that he's done to another human being. And it's all kind of, you hear again and again those court cases, fathers about their son saying, are you going to make 15 minutes of a stupid mistake he made for 15 minutes haunt him for the rest of his life? And it's just,
what was the quote? It was 20 minutes of action, wasn't it?
Exactly, yeah. Edel, exactly. We all remember those moments, and we're going to look back in history and at this in time to come, and it gets worse and worse. It doesn't ever, those statements are just so impossibly lacking in self-awareness. Mm-hmm. And that's how the language, I think, just as Donal was saying, really serves this play and this theme, because it shows us the language in living colour, side by side with the damage that delusion has created. And
also Harrow's language, because it's so simple at times, it's open to ambiguity. So like that thing of him saying, I made the stupidest mistake of my whole life. You wonder what the mistake was. Was the mistake getting caught? Was the mistake doing something a certain way? And something else where I think he says, you were the only one. What does he mean by that? Does he mean she was the only one he loved? She was the only 12-year-old. She was the only one he got caught for, all sorts of ambiguities come into play. Mm-hmm. It's really clever. I wanted to ask you a bit about just the fact that despite all the controversy that came with this play when it originally opened, and despite how unsettling and uncomfortable it might be to watch as a viewer, it has endured. And I don't think it's too much to say that it's now considered a modern classic. Nearly 20 years later, it's been performed everywhere in different languages. It's been on Broadway. Michelle Williams has starred as Una, Jeff Daniels as Ray. What is it about this play that you think makes it endure in that way and makes it so powerful? And would you consider it a modern classic? Don't know.
Well, I think the fact that it's, first of all, it's it's so hard hitting. It's a really upsetting play. It's very hard to watch, but as Sarah was saying on the night, it's also impossible to look away. And so it stays, it stays starkly vivid in the audience member's mind. And because there's a feeling that you've been brought into something, unless you are well aware of what the play is about beforehand, it feels as though you've been almost tricked into having to confront this thing, and that's very powerful. And so I think, the fact that it's a display, it's a kind of it's almost manualistic in a way. It's like here are things to watch out for. Here's how it's done. This is how these people operate. This is how evil can proliferate. This is how evil can actually exist within us. And this is how it can be justified by the perpetrators. I mean, it's forensic in that regard. And I think it's just so well constructed. I think the fact is, it's quite short. It's so intense. There's no break, and it's claustrophobic. We're in the same tiny squalid space all the time. It's just, it absolutely sears into your consciousness. And I think that kind of art is just so important. It really is, because it's the job of a writer and an artist and a person who creates fiction or creates things that aren't real in order to show us what are real, to confront these things. And it's such a head-on confrontation. It's so, like, it's almost profane to try to think up superlatives for how well done the play is and how good it is because of what it's about. But it's so necessary. That kind of art is so necessary.
Sarah, what do you think about why it's stayed so successful despite the fact that it's so difficult?
I mean, for all the reasons the three of us have been discussing and more, Donal and I often tell our students on the MA, that the greatest stories are kind of leading to a moment. And this is the artificiality, I think, of fiction, because it doesn't replicate real life, but it tries to kind of represent important aspects of real life. And for me, I think there's a thousand reasons why this play prevails and continues to be staged all over the place and talked about. And I think our conversation is kind of an example of that.
So I know it's a difficult watch, but it's an incredibly important play. Would you recommend that people go see it?
I definitely would, because it's something that we all have to confront. We all have to think about with no choice. I think also, the actors are incredible. It's just a phenomenal piece of theatre, but it's acted phenomenally. Because I always say about actors, you're at the mercy of the moment in real life. You're creating art live in real time in front of an audience. I don't know how to do it, but the performances were just sublime. You're just so drawn in, and I know Maeve, and still Maeve was completely gone, for me. And same with the actor who plays Ray.
That's Declan Conlon and Maeve Fitzgerald are the two actors. Yeah,
incredible
performances.
What about you, Sarah? Would you recommend it?
Yes, I would recommend it unequivocally. I wish our MA students had, maybe some of them did see it. I wish I'd had time to recommend it to them. I just think I think it's compulsory viewing, I think it's really important. And I think also, there's so much around Una that is really important. We have this discomfort, I think, in a lot of genres and contexts in kind of displaying female characters as anything other than helpless victims. And, she's not helpless. She has a voice. She tells her story. She understands, in a very profound way, the nature of the damage that's been done to her. And we hear this from her, while also seeing the impact of the damage that still persists. And I think that's really important. I think that, we need to give our playwrights courage to look into the darkest places and to try to begin and continue those conversations. And that's what plays are for, really, I think, or this is one of their most important functions.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's what all art is for. And, if we can't look at those places, you know, we're looking at fairy tales, really, aren't we?
Yeah.
Thank you both so much for such an interesting discussion, Donal Ryan and Sarah Moore Fitzgerald, for engaging on this outreach program for a Decadent Theatre Company. If you'd like to book tickets for Blackbird, you can book them online at decadenttheatrecompany.ie. The play is going to be touring around Ireland in May and June 2022, and it's going to visit Cork, Galway, Wexford, Roscommon, Cavan, Sligo, Tipperary, Dublin and Mayo, and you'll find details of all of these dates on decadenttheatrecompany.ie. Thank you both so much.
Thanks a million, Edel. Yeah, thanks.